Warlocks, I know, okay? I know. Getaway artist, bleak watcher, it does everything. Why bother with anything else? Well, mainly because of boredom of that setup. Today we're going to look at something that I think is actually interesting and can potentially compete with the likes of Getaway Artist for those of you getting a little bored on Prismatic Warlock. The main loop of the build is based on Incinerator Snap melee spam. For this build, you are going to need an exotic class item with Necro and Claw to maximize the experience. Please don't close out the video yet. I realize I probably lost 99% of you right there, but maybe watching the video will inspire you to go get one, or maybe you have one lying around. However, you could also just use Claws of Ahamkara on their own. We're going to talk about this more later in the video. This video does contain a mix of just Claw gameplay and Necro and Claw gameplay. Now, we're not going to be straying too far from the Getaway setup because our aspects are still Feed the Void and Bleak Watcher. Feed the Void is because we're going to be spamming a lot of abilities and it will be our sustain. And Bleak Watcher is mainly for the dark energy so that we can go Transcendent, since a lot of our damage is going to be light-based. This is the most maximized version of the setup, but if you have a way to generate dark energy, maybe you're on something like Lost Signal, the new grenade launcher, or you have some other means, you maybe don't need Bleak Watcher as much. That being said, Bleak Watcher is still really, really good for crowd control and champion stuns and just being another thing happening at the same time. So I would only flex this out if you have some kind of a plan in mind. Feed the Void, technically flexible as well, but considering how aggressive this setup is, you are going to want to sustain yourself in some way, and Devour is going to be triggering quite a lot here, which feeds into the Bleak Watcher, which feeds into the Dark Transcendence energy, which you're going to need. It's not that you couldn't use a different aspect, or two different aspects, but the build gets the most out of those two. We're also going to be on Phoenix Dive for this setup since it's a bit more mobile, and even though both Hellion and Weaver's Call work on Phoenix Dive, I don't think it's really great for our melee build to use two class ability aspects that don't help generate more melees as much as the other aspects might. Lightning Surge, technically possible, but the ability that we're going to be spamming isn't our grenade. It's our Incinerator Snap melee. So we want our melee charges for our snap melee, not Lightning Surge. Our fragments are pretty flexible, but there are some things you are going to want to scoop. Facet of Ruin is a lock. Bigger ignitions, this entire build is based on triggering ignitions. You might also take advantage of the stasis portion as well with your Bleak Watcher turrets and freezing targets. Facet of Sacrifice is mostly a lock. While you can get chunks of dark energy pretty quickly if you plan for it, it'll always be nice to get a little bit more, and you should have a light-based buff on you nearly all the time anyway. Facet of Dawn seems like a lock, but ideally we're barely using our weapons in the first place. The more difficult the content gets, the more I think you're going to want or need it for just anti-barrier alone, or just downtime between your abilities if and when you happen to have those moments, which, you know, they happen. They happen. Facet of Protection is a complete lock for more difficult content. You're going to want that defense, and you're going to boost that defense even more in Transcendence, which you will be in a lot of the time. Facet of Blessing. Melee kills trigger health regeneration. I'm kind of soured on trigger health regeneration in general, like the name of that effect. In the spots where it works well, you probably don't really need it, and in the spots where it doesn't, well, it doesn't work well. So, like, why would you want it? Considering that we're going to be running with Song of Flame, Facet of Purpose giving restoration is really nice on top of Devour. But you need to be able to print out a few orbs, aka you need to use maybe 3 heavy-handed in your gloves. 2's probably okay. If you're not on Song of Flame for whatever reason, and you would need a good one, then yeah, Blessing is probably the path forward. Facet of Courage seems like a nice play, but I think is for more endgame stuff, for things that will get debuffed for a while, or stuff that will actually stay alive long enough to warrant such a thing in the first place. Awakening can give you a little more grenade juice, but you should be okay with just Devour. If you want to lock in 5 things to start, go with Ruin, Sacrifice, Protection, Purpose, and Dawn or Courage, and take it from there. There's a good amount of flexibility here, though. Some stuff that I didn't mention, if you wanted to flex that in, are things like Honor, Justice, Generosity, stuff like that for group play. For the artifact, just grab prismatic items with solar stuff to follow, depending on when you're watching this video. This probably isn't going to be too complicated of a process. There's only usually so many options that make sense for the setup. When it comes to Shield Crush, we'd really like to have that melee bonus active, but sadly we don't have the easiest access to Frost Armor, Woven Mail, or Overshields with this setup. You could use some kind of a weapon that would get you those things, I guess, but you'll be fine. I would just carry on without it. Stats-wise, we're maxing out our resilience to start. Discipline should be covered by Devour, so don't get too much there. Melee regen shouldn't be a huge deal, but if you wanted to spec into more strength, I get it. And recovery is always good on a Warlock. Mod-wise, we want supers, we want orbs to give us melee energy. Hands-on, stack them up, heavy-handed, stack them up, resistances in the chest, orb, pickup mods in the boots, and class items should spec for more ability energy on class ability use. We are all in on our abilities. Like I mentioned earlier, the build is a spin-off of the Getaway Artist setup, except that you're rolling with incinerator snaps. It is a little slow to get rolling from 0 as your main engine is Transcendence. Pretty much all of your time outside of Song of Flame or Transcendence should be prioritizing getting back into one of those 2 states. But the build is literally just that. Snap everything in sight, throw stasis turrets everywhere, and keep it rolling as much as possible. When in Transcendence, prioritize your snaps over your grenade, but you are going to need to combo both of them anyway, and I don't think there's really a specific order you should be thinking about when you're in Transcendence, because 99% of the time, if your snaps are up, just use those. In terms of light and dark energy generation, the combo of weapons you want to use doesn't necessarily matter too much. What matters more is your attention to what you need in any given moment. Sometimes my stasis turret popped off and generated a ton of dark energy. Sometimes it wouldn't hit anything at all, and I would need to spam some fusion rifle shots to get some energy. I did find that significantly more often than not, darkness energy was the thing that I needed over light energy. So if you want to use a stasis or strand or even kinetic primary, that's totally fine. Me, I felt comfortable with my Deliverance and a solar hand cannon. Outbreak Perfected, though, is cracked at generating both energies at once. And if you are going to go that route, or like Kvastov, for example, I would probably rotate Facet of Grace into the mix to accelerate that process. Outbreak Perfected, it's really good for making that energy. When in Song of Flame, you're going to want to prioritize your snaps as well, but to a much stronger degree. The grenade in Song of Flame is okay, but it uses more energy than the melee, and the melee is also going to spread poison everywhere. So the only time you should use the grenade is if there are no eligible receivers for your melee, or in the case of a neutral zone infraction, that's going to be 5 yards every time. The melee is also very spammable. You should be able to hit it basically every single time it refreshes. Now, when it comes to the class item combination of the 2, Necro versus Claw, Claw is more important, which is why I said you could use claws on their own. The Necro part spreads poison, but your ignitions are gonna be, or should be, doing a good amount of the heavy lifting, especially in episode 1, since we have some ignition help in the artifact. The poison is just a bonus, where you can hit some targets that maybe don't get killed by an ignition, or you don't trigger an ignition, and then they die later, which could trigger something like Devour, or other on-kill effects. I think it does also generate some Transcendence energy, though, so that's nice too, the poison. In terms of other perks you could combine with Claw, let's just run down the list. Assassin. You could run this if you wanted to, but we want to be spamming our melee as much as possible and be playing aggressively. There's nothing wrong with it, I guess, but it's just not where I think the power of this setup is in most light. Never really a bad choice. Taking this when it comes to an ability-based setup, it's a good next option. Apotheosis. I guess this could give you a jump start to your next Transcendence if you don't have it coming out of your super. It's not actually the worst idea in the world. Filaments. We want to stay moving. Also, you might not even be on Rift. That's a pass. Ophidian is a PvP perk. That's a pass. Osmiomancy, we are going to be on Cold Snap. So, again, not the worst idea, but we're trying to make stasis turrets. I see the vision. It's just not what I think we should use, but, like, I get it. Stag is a Rift-based perk. That's a pass. It's a pass in general. It's just not strong enough. That's the build. It is a bit more active than your standard Bleak Watcher Getaway Artist setup. Maybe not as safe, technically, but it is at least a contender to its throne. It's probably what I'm going to be running for a little bit when I get completely sick of Getaway Artist, which is... It's now. It's now. I'm kind of sick of it now. If you're starting to get tired of Getaway Artist, give this setup a try. It's close enough to the build that it's going to still feel familiar, but also far enough away that it might be more interesting and less passive in nature, but still just pretty much as effective. Thanks for watching. I'll see you next time.